Joe Brady is Buffalo's choice for head coach, and some of the details are starting to emerge. We're going to break down the latest today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of the Herd Mentality Substack, co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, co-host of the NFL First Read Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Locked On Bills is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, I appreciate y'all being here very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Well, folks, welcome in. As you know, Joe Brady is the next head coach of the Buffalo Bills. I gave my initial reaction to that news yesterday, just after the news was announced. And since then, there have been details that are starting to come out about the decision and the direction. And so I want to break down those new details, share some new thoughts, and then I'm excited to talk about some of the potential at defensive coordinator. So that's what we have on tap for you today. This recording is happening at 6 a.m. on Wednesday, January 28th. So if something new has emerged, I don't know about it, and we'll cover that in our next conversation. One thing we know is that the introductory press conference to announce Joe Brady as head coach will happen on Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. And so Thursday at noon, we'll get to see it, right? Joe Brady in a suit, Brandon Beane, probably Terry Pagula, and they'll announce Joe Brady, share their process, and obviously the questions that will come. I'm excited to see how that shakes out on Thursday. Joe Brady will continue to be the Bills' offensive play caller. That came through last night. Multiple reporters shared that information. And so Joe Brady will continue to call plays, which was my expectation, right? I mean, you've been the play caller for the last 2.5 years. In some ways, it got you the job. I wouldn't give that up either. Now, the interesting layer to Joe Brady continuing to call plays is that the run game piece will matter a ton here. Aaron Kromer didn't have the title of run game coordinator, but he was definitely the run game coordinator. He put together the schemes, put together the call sheet. And so that piece of this Bills offense is going to have a bit of a new life to it because Aaron Kromer has retired. Now, one piece of information about that, according to Jordan Schultz, the Jaguars requested and interviewed Austin Gunn from the Bills for their run game coordinator position. Now, they didn't hire him. They hired someone that had a long history with Liam Cohen. But Schultz went on to say that Gunn is expected to be a candidate for other openings, including O-line coach openings. And so this is pretty fascinating to me. You would think that Gunn has been groomed to succeed Aaron Kromer as the Bills' offensive line coach, and the fact that he's already received this type of attention, indicates that he's probably going to get this opportunity. There has been so much coaching turnover across the league, and there's going to be a lot of picking up the pieces across the NFL. And I'd be surprised that, Austin Gunn wouldn't get some job across the league. And there's a part of me that's hopeful that he stays in Buffalo. I really love that he's had the last few years to work under Aaron Kromer. I think we mostly like the development of the Bills' offensive line and the run scheme. And so you'd like to maybe keep that intact, but we'll see where it goes. That's obviously something that's going to be really critical for Joe Brady, is to nail the offensive line coach hire and the support piece of the run game that Kromer was so heavily involved. Now, Brady's been around that too, right? He's well aware of the schemes and what's been implemented, but now he's got to pick up those pieces without Kromer, and that's something that he'll have to prove. Ian Rappaport came out and shared this on X. Context for the Bills hiring Joe Brady as head coach. He was a wanted man. Brady was very high on the Ravens list for offensive coordinator. Sean Payton wanted Brady as offensive coordinator, perhaps even with play calling. And so that's interesting for sure. Now, I know you're probably thinking, well, neither of those are head coaching jobs, but those are two pretty high profile offensive positions. I mean, Lamar Jackson's offensive coordinator, and then Sean Payton to give up play calling? Wow, that would be pretty big. And obviously, Joe Brady got his start in the NFL under Sean Payton for a couple of years. And so, there was some demand. We talked about how Brady had interviewed for 6 of the 10 openings across the league, and he ultimately lands in Buffalo. Now, I'm curious to see where the Bills go with the offensive coordinator position. I would expect Joe Brady to hire one that's a non-play caller and do all of the coordinating of the offense except for calling the plays. We talk about this all the time when I do the primer episodes. I talk about an offensive-minded head coach, and then we get to the offensive coordinator. We acknowledge who it is, but then we say, yeah, the head coach is the play caller. The Bills will more than likely have an offensive coordinator that serves as a non-play caller. So I'm curious to see who Joe Brady settles on for that position. Another note here, Peter Schrager shared this on X last night, a note on Josh Allen's role in the Bills head coach search. He was in the room for many of the candidates' in-person interviews and got to see behind the curtains on process and offer his opinions on each. He wasn't a part of the narrowing of the field or the final head coach decision. So it doesn't really feel like, based on this report, that Josh Allen said, I would like you to select Joe Brady to be the head coach. It sounds like he was involved and sat in on things, but didn't narrow it down and didn't, obviously make the call. Albert Breer made it pretty clear that Brandon Beane made this decision. It's a Brandon Beane choice. Allen was involved. He gave his opinions. This was ultimately Brandon Beane's choice. And look, he's the president of football operations. He's a general manager. That's what he's tasked to do. And I'm sure the panel that was with him that sat in on these interviews had input, but it's Brandon Beane's call. That's what he is hired to do. And guess what? If it doesn't work out, Brandon Beane's getting fired. And so a huge decision, rooting for it to work out. We'll see where it goes. So those are a lot of the new details that have emerged. Ryan Fitzpatrick called Brandon Beane on Tuesday and shared some of that conversation on his podcast. I want to break that down and share some new thoughts on this overall situation here next. So folks, be sure to stick with us.
Hey, it's Matt Derry from the Locked On Lions podcast. The people I love depend on me. If I'm gone, the financial responsibilities don't disappear. I didn't want my family figuring things out during the hardest moment of their lives. That's why I knew only one place to go. I chose life insurance through my friends at Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast and easy, 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. I love the folks at Ethos. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get the free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. That is ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Ethos.com/LockedOnNFL. Application times and rates may vary.
There's nothing like being in an NBA arena, the crowd, the energy, the moment. Getting tickets, though, that part hasn't always been so simple. That's why Game Time has become the go-to app for scoring tickets fast. Without the hassle, it puts the advantage back where it belongs with the fans. You can pull up the Game Time app, you can pick an upcoming NBA game, and you'll find tickets within minutes. You'll love being able to see the all-in price up front. There's no surprise fees at checkout. Plus, being able to see the view from the seat before purchasing will make the decision easy. They have zone deals that stand out, great last-minute ticket prices. Everything feels quick, intuitive, and stress-free from start to finish. So take the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. That's code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. And remember, it's gametime.co, not .com. Well, folks, welcome back. I mentioned that Ryan Fitzpatrick shared that he spoke to Brandon Beane on Tuesday, wanted to get some clarity on the decision, felt like there was quite the response on social media initially to the news, and said, I got to call Brandon Beane for myself. And so he did, and he shared the details on the Wednesday episode of Fitz and Wit. So make sure you listen to that and get the full report from Ryan Fitzpatrick. But I want to share some of the highlights of what Fitzpatrick said on that podcast. He said that Brandon Beane told him that they gave every candidate a fair shake and that this wasn't just Joe Brady from the outset. He said they were careful to not dismiss Brady because he was part of the previous staff, and said they enjoyed learning a lot about Brady in the process and got to ask new questions and learn about him and his vision, and they love what they heard. You know, you're around the guy, he's a quarterback's coach to an OC. You probably never had that chance to really sit down and learn the person through an interview process. And so sounds like that was an enjoyable component for everyone involved. Beane said that they wanted a guy who knows what makes players tick, with high emotional intelligence, with a great feel for the building. Called Joe Brady a great communicator with high energy and a steady presence. Loved his CEO vision, which that's been echoed through multiple reports. Albert Breer said that. I think you had a few others as well, maybe Adam Schefter. But this CEO vision feels like something that won Beane and company over in a big way. And you know, even Fitz said in that conversation to us right through the podcast that the trend of the league is kind of getting away from the young hotshot, scheme wizards and more into the Vrabels, the Campbells, guys that are truly CEO types. Now, I think that can mean a lot of different things. I'm very curious to hear more about that during the press conference on Thursday. Like, what does that CEO vision mean for the Bills and Joe Brady? And what did you love so much about what he shared? Because you got the impression that Sean McDermott was like a CEO type coach, but maybe Sean McDermott struggled within that to truly, take his hands off things and let his subordinates do what they needed to do. I think that's pretty clear when you look at the defensive coordinator pieces, right? Like Leslie Frazier was hired, and then he was at multiple times taking the play calling away from him. Same thing with Bobby Babich, like took the play calling away at times. So like you trust people to do things, but then you have to insert yourself. And I think you can look pretty clearly at some of the offensive stuff and feel like Sean McDermott's inserted himself as well. And so this is one of the main things that I want to learn on Thursday during the press conference is what about this CEO vision from Joe Brady did you love so much? What are you looking for out of that piece? Because it's been celebrated so much by people in the aftermath, right, that would have some inside knowledge. Well, what was it? I'm very curious about that. And I thought Ryan Fitzpatrick shared an interesting thought that was his own. He said, look, the easiest thing would be to not hire Joe Brady. And if Joe Brady doesn't work out, Brandon Beane is getting fired. It's a big, big choice here for Mr. Beane. Now I want to share some new thoughts. And one of the biggest, I guess, criticisms that I've seen about this move is people are calling it a half measure. They took a half measure here. And that has like a negative connotation to it. But the question I would ask is, did they need a full measure? Now, the Bills are not most teams who are searching for a new head coach. They're not. Most teams that are searching for a new head coach don't win a lot of games. They don't go to the playoffs. They don't win divisions. These are very different circumstances in Buffalo. And so I think a lot of people got excited about the idea of sweeping changes without asking if that was necessary or even the right idea. And so then you've convinced yourself that something really, really, really new is coming. And then you're set up to be disappointed when the offensive coordinator gets promoted. I think when they fired Sean McDermott and kept Brandon Beane, that was probably a pretty good sign that we shouldn't have expected massive change. And I'm inclined to believe that it was an open search. I think they interviewed 9 candidates with the intent of truly considering each of them. And they went with Joe Brady. One thing I'll say about this whole thing, I did an episode end of last week evaluating Brandon Beane and the job that he did building the 2025 Buffalo Bills. And we took a fair look at it. We celebrated the wins. We criticized the losses along the way in terms of, hey, this is all hindsight. We can see the full picture, how it worked. This is what went well. This is what didn't. The thing that absolutely went well for Brandon Beane, and I would say almost every offseason of his career, is that he nails the internal evaluations. Who to extend, who to let go. In terms of players, I think he's done a phenomenal job of knowing who to keep and who to let go. Has it been perfect? No, of course not. But I think the hit right there is unbelievably high. You can highlight very few players that the Bills kept or let go, and you feel like it was truly the wrong decision where there wasn't an injury piece that maybe made it look worse. Like, are you going to criticize him for extending Matt Milano and Trey White and then them getting injured seriously in back-to-back years after? Like, no, that's not fair. But overwhelmingly, he does a phenomenal job with internal evaluations. And that gives me a lot of comfort in his ability to not only interview and hire Brandon Beane or Joe Brady, but to have observed him for the last several years and feel like, yes, that is a person that we need to stick with. And not only stick with, but elevate. And so that gives me a lot of comfort because I think Brandon Beane, for as much criticism as you want to extend for outside moves, maybe free agency, the draft, whatever you want to point to, he's done a terrific job with internal evaluations. And let's hope that applies to Joe Brady. One thing that I have also seen out there that I think is disingenuous is acting like they didn't do anything here. Like, Joe Brady is not Sean McDermott. He is not Sean McDermott. He's, 15 years younger. He's offensive-minded. They have very different paths to getting to what, is the same position, head coach of the Bills. Very different paths, very different people. I think it's disingenuous to act like that's not a notable change just because Joe Brady was Sean McDermott's offensive coordinator. Joe Brady has the opportunity now to run the whole thing. It's all his. And it's disingenuous for me to look at this as nothing's changed. Especially as we've started to get some ideas about where the defense might go, which we'll talk about in segment 3. The last thought that I want to share here in this segment is just kind of zooming out on Sean McDermott and his relationships with offensive coordinators that he's hired. He's hired 4 offensive coordinators. Rick Dennison for 2017, he was one and done. And that was always silly. Rick Dennison's like a notorious West Coast offensive mind, and you're putting Tyrod Taylor in a timing-based offense, and it was horrible. Now, they backdoor into the playoffs, but he was one and done. Then they hire Brian Daboll, and I think that was mostly very good. Obviously, Brian Daboll leaves to be the head coach of the Giants, and there's truly friction, right, between McDermott and Daboll. Then you get Ken Dorsey, who, what did he last, a year and a half? Fired. Obviously, Sean McDermott didn't think highly of what Ken Dorsey was doing with the offense. And then you get to Joe Brady, who I think there's a lot of good, right? There's a lot of good. I'm not saying that it's all perfect and that there's not frustrating things, but there's a lot of good. And Sean McDermott this year was openly critical of Joe Brady, and Joe Brady openly pushed back. Sean McDermott multiple times said things got too cute on offense. Sean McDermott even said there were times where it's too hard on the quarterback. And Joe Brady pushed back openly as well. Like, as you want to maybe convince yourself that McDermott did have a lot of tug and pull as it relates to the offense, I think you look at these relationships with his four offensive coordinators and say, yeah, I think a legitimate reason to believe that that's true. And so as we do consider Joe Brady taking over the full operation and are curious about how much Sean McDermott influence was there, especially on things that frustrated us, I think you look at all four of those relationships and think, I'm not sure Sean McDermott was overly fond with any of these guys. I just found that to be interesting. I wanted to share it here with you. All right, coming up next, I am fired up about one of the rumored leading candidates to become the next defensive coordinator for the Bills. We'll talk about that next. Folks, be sure to stick with me. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. One final Sunday, one last kickoff, the final chance to get in on the action before the NFL season officially comes to a close. This is Super Bowl 60, and FanDuel is making sure you're right in the middle of it with a special offer just in time for the biggest game of the year. Whether you're backing the favorite, riding with the underdog, or building one last same-game parlay, this is the game everyone's been waiting for. This is where predictions turn into plays, stats turn into storylines, and every snap feels bigger. It's the perfect way to cap the offseason and make the Super Bowl even more exciting from kickoff to final whistle. If you're a new customer, just bet $5 and you'll get $200 in bonus bets if you win. Make it count, because after the Super Bowl, the season is over. Last call for football on FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of Super Bowl 60. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, how about this one? Adam Schefter shared on Tuesday afternoon that Jim Leonard is a leading candidate to become the Bills' defensive coordinator. That has me excited, very excited. I am hopeful that the Bills change defensive coordinators. I would be disappointed if Bobby Babich continued. Not that I don't believe Bobby Babich can be a good defensive coordinator and that he hasn't done some very good things. It's just I'm really ready for a new idea on defense. And Jim Leonard would represent a new idea. And so maybe you're familiar with Jim Leonard, maybe not. Jim Leonard was a safety for the Bills for a few years. Good player. Played for some other teams as well. Was a good player throughout his career. Kind of came up under Rex Ryan. And then he was a coach in Wisconsin where he played college football. Really outstanding defensive coordinator there. And then he goes to Denver the last couple of years and was actually their assistant head coach this past year. And defensive passing game coordinator under Vance Joseph the last 2 years. And I would just be really excited about this. Yes, it's a pretty big shift in ideology. You think about the Jim Leonard defenses and his influences. You think about a mix of odd fronts with some even fronts. I think about man coverage, aggressive pressure schemes. Different than what we see here, or we've seen here with Sean McDermott. And while it is a different scheme, I don't feel like it's that big of a lift personnel-wise to get what Jim Leonard would want. Because it's not a very traditional multiple front defense. There's still a lot of penetration elements to it. And so I look at what a lot of the Bills have in place, and I feel like it does work. Now, they need to find a little bit more speed off the edge in terms of pass rush. They need a little bit more downhill skill at linebacker. But I think they have the corners in Hairston and Benford to play 30 to 40% man. They might have to look at the slot a little bit. Cole Bishop will be fine. And then I think you can look at like a guy like PJ Locke that has been a nice reserve in Denver as potentially a starter in Buffalo. That would be a modest free agent investment. So, yeah, you'll have to strengthen your depth with your D-line and find a little more speed off the edge. But I was looking at this Bills defense in general, and I was thinking, regardless of who comes back here, I think you only have 5 or 6 defensive starters that will or should return, given all the expiring contracts, giving the need for a shift. You are always going to have a little bit of overhaul combined with, younger players taking steps and finding themselves in bigger roles. But I don't think the Bills are that far off personnel-wise from being able to shift into what I think Jim Leonard would want to get done defensively. Now, look, there's a process that has to play out. There's a ton of defensive coordinator jobs available across the league. And I'm sure Jim Leonard will be, a candidate for a lot of positions. I'd hope he'd want to come to Buffalo because that would get me excited about the direction of the defense. But whether it's Jim Leonard or not, this is a good indicator that it's not going to be Bobby Babich and company trying to pick up the pieces of Sean McDermott's defense. And as this entire process has played out, where the Bills let go of Sean McDermott and elevate Brandon Beane, and they let go of Sean McDermott and elevate Joe Brady, the messaging's pretty clear. They feel like they needed to remove Sean McDermott from this equation. Maybe they feel like he had a ceiling over this team. And that there's a lot to love about what Sean McDermott has built, but he's also a limiting factor in why the playoff losses keep happening. And so it feels like they're trying to, in some ways, keep the best of what Sean McDermott had in place and then pivot away from the things that were problematic. And I think a shift with the defense is inevitable, necessary, and something that I'm excited about, especially if it ends up being Jim Leonard. There are other defensive coaches that I would love. I'd love Anthony Weaver. I'd love Jim Schwartz. Admittedly, I haven't spent that much time thinking about defensive coordinator candidates, but those would all be very attractive to me. But I would be really excited if it were Jim Leonard. All right, so to give you some ideas on some stuff that's coming up, the press conference is Thursday at noon. We're going to do Bill Squad at 1:30 p.m. Eastern time on Thursday. So just after that thing concludes, you figure it's going to go about an hour. And then at 1:30, we're going to go live. Myself, Jeremy White, Jerry Ostrowski, we are going to react to that press conference and all of the new information that comes, right, probably in the next few days, and have that roundtable discussion. And don't forget, if you're part of our Discord channel, I go live every Wednesday night. So tonight at 8 o'clock Eastern time in our Discord channel, we're having our weekly herd hangout. Myself, Jerry Ostrowski, we are going to be hanging out, taking your questions. We have it's kind of like a big roundtable discussion. Like, we bring people on the video hangout, ask questions, talk, banter. People come with cool stuff. We have fun games that we like to play. It's all happening every Wednesday, including tonight. So would love for you to be part of that. How do you get into our Discord channel? Great question. It's an incentive for being part of our subtext or our Substack. Subtext is where you get text message updates from me right to your phone. So as all of this plays out, right, the Bills interview candidates, as they make decisions, I send text updates right to your phone, and I'll continue to do that all off season long. As they sign players, I'll share thoughts. I'll share some content that maybe that I feel is interesting. So become part of our subtext, and you'll get that. Plus, you get into our Discord channel that has over 2,000 Bills fans, and we talk Bills, Sabres all day. And, of course, we go live every Wednesday. So be part of that. Or you can join our Substack, which is where I provide additional written and film content. So all year long, I provide additional written and film content in the Substack. If you want to be part of either, go to thejoemarino.com. You can check them out. You can become part of it. Get into that Discord channel. Be part of our live weekly herd hangout every Wednesday at 8 o'clock in the Discord channel. Again, thejoemarino.com. There's a link in today's show notes and everyday show notes for you to check that out and be part of what we have going on. So much cool community being built around this podcast, and it has become probably my favorite part of getting to do this. So don't miss out on that. All right, folks, that's the latest. Those are my newest thoughts on Joe Brady as head coach of the Buffalo Bills. We'll get more information, I'm sure of it, and we'll break it down every step of the way. So don't miss anything. Make sure you're subscribed. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again real soon.